I'm Rachel, and when I was 15, my parents left me at a crowded mall. Not by accident, not because they forgot me, but because they wanted to teach me a lesson. I never went back. But years later, when I had finally built a life of my own, they found me again. Not because they loved me, but because they wanted control. They tried to take everything from me. But they forgot one thing. I wasn't that scared kid anymore. My name is Rachel Parker, and I grew up in a small town outside Salem, Oregon. I was used to the punishments, the cold silences, the way my dad, Magnus, would slam the doors just to watch me flinch. My mom, Celeste, loved to remind me that I was a disappointment, that I'd never be like my sister Madeline. They said it was for my own good to teach me discipline, to make me strong. I just learned how to stay quiet, how to disappear inside myself so I wouldn't get yelled at. That summer they told me we were going to Portland for back-to-school shopping. I almost believed it, almost felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they would treat me like they treated Maddie. We drove in silence, Magnus tapping the steering wheel, Celeste scrolling through her phone. I stared out the window watching the trees blur by, pretending I was somewhere else. When we got to the mall, Celeste told me to grab sodas from the food court while they parked the car. I nodded, clutching the crumpled $5 bill she handed me, trying not to think about how my stomach felt like it was folding in on itself. The mall was busy, filled with the hum of conversations, the smell of pretzels and coffee mixing in the air. I stood in line, my hands shaking as I counted the bills in my pocket, hoping they wouldn't yell at me if I got the wrong change. The girl at the counter handed me the sodas, her smile tight and practiced. I turned away, balancing the cups in my hands, weaving through the crowd. That was when my phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message from Celeste. "Let's see how you find your way home." At first, I thought it was a mistake. A cruel joke, maybe. I laughed, a small shaky sound, and texted back. "Where are you?" No response. I tried calling, pressing the phone to my ear, hearing it ring and ring before going to voicemail. I called again and again, my thumb shaking, the low battery warning flashing in the corner of the screen. I pushed through the doors, the blast of warm air hitting me as I stepped into the parking lot. The lot was huge, rows of cars stretching in every direction. I walked up and down the aisles, looking for our blue Chevy, feeling my chest tighten with every empty row. "Mom, Dad," I whispered, clutching the sodas so hard the plastic lids buckled. People walked past me laughing, carrying bags, holding hands with their kids who weren't left alone in a parking lot. I felt like I was underwater, everything muffled, the sun too bright as it beat down on the pavement. My phone buzzed once more before the screen went black. I stood there, $15 in my pocket, 2 warm sodas in my hands, and a phone that wouldn't turn back on. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears, drowning out the sound of cars, the voices, the world around me. I kept telling myself they would come back, that this was just another test, another twisted lesson they wanted me to learn. Minutes felt like hours as I sat down on the curb watching the cars pull in and out, families loading bags into trunks. Mothers fixing their daughters' hair, fathers lifting toddlers into car seats. The mall felt like a different world, one I didn't belong in, one that wasn't meant for a girl like me. I wrapped my arms around my knees, pressing my forehead against them, trying to keep myself from crying. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction if they were watching from somewhere, waiting to see me break. I told myself I was strong, that I could figure it out, that I didn't need them. But deep down, sitting there alone with the sun burning the back of my neck, I just wanted them to come back. A car pulled up near me, and for a second I thought it was them. I stood up too fast, my legs shaky, the sodas slipping in my hands. A woman stepped out holding her toddler, her husband following with a diaper bag. They didn't even glance at me as they walked past, laughing about something I couldn't hear. I sat back down, pressing my palm against the pavement, feeling the heat burn into my skin. I checked the phone again, tapping the screen, begging it to turn on. Nothing. I didn't know what I would even do if it did. Call them again. Leave another voicemail they wouldn't listen to. Call the police. What would I even say? My parents left me at the mall and I don't know how to get home. A group of teenagers walked past, joking and pushing each other, the smell of fries clinging to them. I watched them, wondering if they had parents who cared, where they were, parents who would come pick them up. One of them looked at me and looked away, quickly whispering something to her friend. I pulled my knees closer, trying to make myself smaller. Time felt strange, like the world was moving around me while I stayed stuck. I tried to remember how far Portland was from home. An hour more, could I even walk that far if I needed to? I thought about hitchhiking, but the idea made my stomach twist. I thought about going back inside the mall asking someone for help, but the thought of explaining why I was alone made me feel sick. A security guard walked by glancing at me with a frown. I looked away, pretending to check my phone, pretending I wasn't alone. The last thing I wanted was to be taken somewhere, to have them call Celeste and Magnus, to have them come back angry, telling everyone I was causing trouble again. The sun was starting to set, painting everything in orange and pink, long shadows stretching across the parking lot. I stood up, my legs numb, and walked toward the entrance of the mall, clutching the now warm sodas, trying to think of what to do next. Inside, the mall was starting to empty, families gathering bags, kids whining for ice cream, couples holding hands. I walked past them feeling like I was watching a movie I wasn't a part of. I found a bench near the food court and sat down, placing the sodas beside me. My stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since morning. A little girl with curly hair looked at me while licking her ice cream, her mother gently wiping her mouth with a napkin. The mother smiled at her and the girl laughed, ice cream dripping onto her hand. I looked away quickly, biting the inside of my cheek, forcing the tears back. A voice in my head kept saying they would come back. They always did eventually. Maybe this was just another test, another twisted lesson. But deep down I knew it wasn't. I thought about Madeline, how she would have known what to do, how she would have called a friend, made it look easy. But I wasn't Madeline. I was Rachel, the daughter they forgot on purpose. The overhead lights in the mall flickered on, humming softly as people began to leave. I stood up, walking toward the exit, feeling the weight of the day pressing on my shoulders. Outside, the parking lot was half empty now, the sky turning darker, the air cooler against my skin. I walked toward the bus stop near the edge of the lot, the sign tilted slightly, the schedule faded. I didn't have enough money for a ticket, but I needed to do something, anything. Standing there watching the cars pass by, I felt something inside me shift. If they weren't coming back, I would have to find my own way. I wasn't sure where I would go or how I would get there, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to wait for them anymore. I pulled my hood up and started walking toward the edge of the parking lot. My legs felt heavy, each step slow, but I kept moving. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't sit there any longer. The streetlights buzzed above me, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. A few cars passed by, their headlights flashing across my face, but no one slowed down. I stopped near a bench by the bus stop, the metal cold against my hands. I placed the warm sodas down and wiped my palms on my jeans. I tried to remember the bus routes, wondering if I could get close to home, wondering if I even wanted to. A breeze picked up, making me shiver, the thin fabric of my hoodie useless against the chill that settled into the night air. I pulled my knees up to my chest, resting my chin on them, trying to ignore the hunger twisting in my stomach. Rachel. The voice came from behind me, unsure but familiar enough to make me lift my head. I turned and there he was, Ben Thompson, holding a bag from a bookstore, his brown hair messy like always. He looked at me, confusion and worry on his face. Ben, I said, my voice cracking. What are you doing out here? He asked, stepping closer, glancing around like he was expecting someone else to appear. I didn't know how to answer, so I just looked down at the ground, blinking hard. He stood there for a second, shifting from foot to foot before sitting down on the bench next to me. Are you okay? He asked quietly. I let out a small, bitter laugh, shaking my head. No, I whispered. They left me. His eyes widened, his mouth opening like he was going to say something, but he stopped, looking at me like he wasn't sure he heard me right. My parents, I said, my voice shaking now. They left me here. They're not coming back. Ben was quiet, his eyes searching my face. I could see the moment it clicked, the way his jaw tightened, the way he looked down at his hands clenched in his lap. Come on, he said, standing up and reaching for my arm. I pulled back a little, confused. My mom's here, he said. We're not leaving you here. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff, and followed him across the parking lot. I saw Susan standing by a car, the back door open, a small lamp inside giving off a warm glow. She was looking down at her phone, but when she saw me, her face changed, softening. Rachel, she asked, stepping forward. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My throat felt tight, my eyes burning. I nodded, biting down on my lip to keep from crying. She says her parents left her here, Ben said, his voice low. Susan looked at me, her eyes wide, and then she glanced at Ben, back to me, and took a deep breath. Get in the car, honey, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Let's get you warm. I climbed into the back seat, sitting on the edge, unsure if I was allowed to lean back. The warmth of the car wrapped around me, the scent of coffee and cinnamon lingering in the air. Susan got in the front seat, turning to look at me. Are you hungry? She asked. I nodded, wiping at my eyes with the sleeve of my hoodie. We'll get you something to eat at home, she said, giving me a small smile. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I looked out the window, watching the mall grow smaller behind us, the lights fading into the distance. My hands were still shaking, but for the first time that day I felt like I could finally breathe. Susan drove with both hands gripping the wheel, her eyes flicking to the mirror. Ben sat in the front seat, turning around every few minutes to check on me. I hugged my backpack to my chest, pressing my cheek against it, trying to stay small, quiet, invisible. The glow of the streetlights passed over us, making the car feel like it was moving through tunnels of light and shadow. You're safe now, Rachel, Susan said softly, not taking her eyes off the road. I swallowed, my throat dry, and nodded. I didn't feel safe, not yet, but I wanted to believe her. My stomach hurt, empty and twisted, but I was too tired to care. I closed my eyes for a moment, but every time I blinked I saw the empty parking lot, the headlights moving past me the way they never came back. Susan pulled into a small driveway in front of a 2-story house with blue shutters. The porch light was on, warm and steady, and I stared at it as if it might disappear. Ben jumped out first, grabbing the bags, then opened my door, holding it with a small, nervous smile. Come on, he said. I stepped out, my legs weak, and followed him up the steps. Susan unlocked the door, pushing it open, and the smell of something warm and sweet hit me. Cinnamon, maybe apples, something that made my chest tighten with a pain I couldn't name. Go wash your hands, Ben, Susan said, glancing at me. Rachel, would you like something to eat? I nodded, hugging my arms around myself. She led me to the kitchen, where a plate of cookies sat on the counter next to a pot of tea. She handed me a cookie, and I took a small bite, the taste soft and warm, crumbling on my tongue. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until that moment. Ben came back, dropping into a chair, glancing at me, then at his mom. Can she stay here tonight? He asked. Susan paused, her hand on the tea kettle, looking at me with soft eyes. Of course, she said. She's not going anywhere tonight. I felt my eyes burn, but I blinked the tears away quickly, taking another bite, chewing slowly to keep my mouth busy. Susan handed me a mug of tea, and I wrapped my hands around it, letting the heat sink into my skin. You can take a shower if you'd like, honey, Susan said, her voice gentle. We'll find you some clothes. I nodded again, unable to find my voice. She led me upstairs, showing me the bathroom, placing a towel on the counter. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. I turned on the water, watching the steam rise, the mirror fogging up. I peeled off my clothes, the fabric stiff, the smell of the mall and sweat clinging to them. I stepped under the water, letting it run over me, washing away the dirt, the fear, the day. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth hold me, the sound of the water drowning out the thoughts in my head. After I dried off and put on the oversized t-shirt and sweatpants Susan had left outside the door. They smelled like detergent, like something clean, like something safe. I stepped out, clutching my dirty clothes to my chest, and found Ben waiting in the hallway. He looked at me, then at the floor. My room's down there, he said, pointing. Mom said you can sleep in the guest room. Thank you, I whispered, my voice small. He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck, then walked away, leaving me standing there. Susan showed me the guest room, a small space with a bed covered in a quilt, a lamp on the nightstand casting a soft glow. If you need anything, just knock on my door, she said. I nodded, stepping inside, placing my clothes on a chair. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hand over the quilt, the softness unfamiliar under my fingertips. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the glow from the hallway lighting the room. I lay down, pulling the blanket over me, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt calm, not heavy and sharp like it did at home. My eyes grew heavy, the warmth of the bed pulling me under. Just before sleep took me, I heard Ben's voice, low and serious, drifting from the hallway. Mom, I don't want her to go back there. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a small spark of hope that Maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have to. That morning, I woke to the soft hum of voices downstairs, the smell of coffee drifting up the hallway. For a moment, wrapped in the warmth of the quilt, I almost forgot where I was. I almost believed I was in a home that was mine with people who loved me. But then I heard my name low and worried, and the fear crept back in. I slipped out of bed, pulling the borrowed sweatpants tighter around my waist, and padded down the hallway. Susan stood in the kitchen, phone in her hand, her lips pressed into a thin line. Ben sat at the table, cereal untouched, his fingers drumming against the wood. They both looked up when they saw me. I froze, heart pounding, searching their faces for anger, for disappointment, for the cold look I knew too well. But Susan's eyes were only sad. "Rachel, honey, come sit down," she said softly. I moved slowly, pulling out the chair across from Ben. He gave me a small, tight smile, but his eyes were worried, darting to his mom and back to me. Susan took a deep breath, setting the phone down in front of me. The screen was filled with comments, like hearts floating across a video that was still playing. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop my eyes from moving to the image. Celeste's face filled the screen, tears streaking down her cheeks, hair pulled back like she hadn't slept in days. She clutched a tissue in her hand, voice trembling as she spoke. "Our daughter is missing," she said, looking into the camera with wet, pleading eyes. "She's only 15. We're terrified for her. If anyone knows where she is, please tell us. We just want our baby home." Magnus stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, nodding solemnly. "She's just a child," he said, his voice rough with fake emotion. "She doesn't know what's best for her. We're begging anyone out there to help us bring our daughter back." Below the video, there were pictures of me. One from a birthday when I was 10, my face lit up by candles, smiling at the camera. Another of me in a school play dressed as a tree, my face painted green, grinning shyly. The caption above the photos read, "We miss our little girl. Please help us find her." I felt the world tilt, my stomach tightening into a hard knot. I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. My hands shook as I scrolled, reading the comments. "She's so ungrateful. I can't believe a child would do this. Poor parents, they must be so worried. They don't deserve this." Tears blurred my vision, the words smearing together, sharp and cruel. I handed the phone back to Susan with trembling hands, pulling my knees up onto the chair, wrapping my arms around them. "They're lying," I managed to whisper, my voice cracking. They left me there." "I know, sweetheart," Susan said, her hand covering mine, warm and steady. "We know the truth." Ben's fists were clenched on the table, his jaw tight. "They're making you look like a runaway. Like it's your fault." I shook my head, burying my face in my arms, the heat of shame and fear burning through me. I could hear the comments in my head, the whispers at school, the judgment in the eyes of neighbors who only saw what Celeste and Magnus wanted them to see. "What if they come here?" I asked, lifting my head, my voice small and shaking. "What if they try to take me back?" "They won't," Susan said firmly, her eyes sharp now. "They can't just take you. We won't let that happen." Ben reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine. "You're safe here, Rachel," he said. "You don't have to go back." A sob escaped before I could stop it, and I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to swallow it down. Susan moved to my side, wrapping her arms around me, holding me close. I felt her heartbeat against my cheek, steady and calm, nothing like the cold, sharp silence of home. For the first time, I let myself cry in front of someone else, the tears soaking into Susan's sweater, my shoulders shaking as I let the fear pour out of me. She didn't pull away. She didn't tell me to stop. When the tears slowed, Susan pulled back, brushing the hair from my face. "We're going to call child services today," she said softly. "We're going to make sure you're protected." Fear flickered again, but I nodded, wiping my face with the sleeve of my sweater. Ben was still watching me, his eyes calm but fierce. "You're not alone anymore," he said, and for the first time I almost believed it. Susan stood up, grabbing her phone again, her face set with quiet determination. "I'm going to make some calls," she said, squeezing my shoulder before stepping into the hallway. Ben stayed seated across from me, drumming his fingers on the table, eyes flicking toward me every few seconds. I tried to swallow the knot in my throat, my eyes darting around the room, noticing the family pictures on the walls. Pictures of Ben as a kid, smiling with missing teeth, standing next to Susan and Michael in front of a Christmas tree. Pictures of a family that wanted him. The sound of Susan's voice drifted in from the hallway, low and firm, and I could hear her saying my name, explaining, repeating. She was left there. She has nowhere else. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the fear crawling back and reminding me that even if I was safe for now, they were still out there. Magnus. Celeste. The way Magnus would slam the doors so hard the windows rattled, the way Celeste's smile would tighten when she was about to say something that would cut deeper than any slap. Ben's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, pulling me out of the memory. "Come on," he said, jerking his head toward the back door. "Let's get some air." I followed him out to the small backyard, the cold morning air hitting my skin, making me shiver. Ben sat down on the back steps, and I sat next to him, pulling my knees to my chest, the borrowed sweatpants brushing against the wooden steps. "I know it's scary," Ben said after a moment, staring out at the fence. "But my mom's not going to let them take you. They're going to make everyone think it's my fault," I whispered. Ben glanced at me, his eyes sharp. "Anyone who believes them doesn't know you." I didn't answer, staring at the frost on the grass, the way it sparkled in the early sunlight. A bird landed on the fence, chirping once before flying off, and for a moment the world felt quiet, almost normal. Susan came out holding her phone, her face pale but calm. "Child services will come by this afternoon," she said. "They'll talk to you, Rachel, but I'll be here. We'll figure this out." I nodded, fear curling in my stomach, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. Later that day, Ben and I sat on the couch, the television on, but neither of us watching. Susan's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, her expression freezing for a split second before she let out a breath. "What is it?" Ben asked, sitting up straighter. Susan turned the phone so we could see. "A post on Facebook with my face, the picture of me when I was 10, smiling with cake on my cheeks. Above it in bold letters, 'Our daughter is missing. Please help us find her.' There were hundreds of comments. 'Praying for you. She'll come home. Such an ungrateful child.' My hands started to shake as I scrolled through, seeing names I recognized. Neighbors. Parents from school. Even one of my teachers commenting, 'Stay strong, she'll come back.' They're making me look like I ran away," I said, my voice small. Ben leaned forward, anger flashing in his eyes. "They're lying. Everyone's going to see it eventually." Susan sat down next to me, pulling me into a side hug. "It doesn't matter what they say, Rachel. We know the truth." I wanted to believe her, but the words on the screen felt like they were pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. That night, as I lay in the guest bed, I heard Ben's voice in the hallway again, low and angry. "Mom, they're tagging my photos. They're commenting on my page. They're saying we kidnapped her." Susan's voice was calm but tight. "I'll handle it." I rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter around me, staring at the shadows on the wall. I thought of the way Celeste would look at me when I tried to speak, the way Magnus would laugh when I cried. I thought of the empty parking lot, the cold concrete under my shoes, the way they never looked back. The fear was there, but under it something else was growing. A small spark of anger, burning steady and quiet. They weren't going to take me back. They weren't going to control me anymore. Not ever again. I woke up to the sound of Susan's voice, low and tense, drifting up the hallway. I slipped out of bed, pressing my ear against the cool wood of the door, listening. Her words were sharp, each one clipped like she was trying to hold herself together. "You have no right to threaten us," she said. I held my breath, pressing my hand against my chest to calm the pounding in my ribs. "You're not her legal guardian anymore." Susan continued, her voice shaking just once before steadying. "If you want to discuss this, you can talk to child services." A deep voice answered, muffled but cold, and I pressed closer, trying to catch every word. "You're harboring a runaway," the man said. "You're risking everything for a kid who isn't even yours." I could almost see Susan's jaw tighten, the way her eyes narrowed when she was angry. "We're done here," she snapped, and the line went dead. I backed away from the door, my heart racing, slipping back into bed before she could see me. I pulled the covers to my chin, staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting as the morning light moved across the room. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with a name that made my stomach drop. Madeline. I hesitated, then swiped it open, reading her message. "Em về đi, đừng làm khó mọi người nữa." My throat closed, heat burning behind my eyes. I typed back quickly, my fingers trembling. "Did you give them my address?" The typing bubble popped up, then disappeared. then popped up again before her reply came. Your family, Rachel. You belong home. Home. I almost laughed, but it came out as a choked breath, tears slipping down my temples onto the pillow. I sat up, pulling my knees to my chest, staring at the message. Madeline had always been the perfect daughter, the one who never spoke back, who smiled when Celeste told her to, who hugged Magnus even when his breath smelled like whiskey. I used to watch her, and wish I could be like her, wish I could make them love me like they loved her. Now she was telling me to go back, to give up the small piece of freedom I had found, to crawl back into that house and pretend everything was fine. My phone buzzed again, another message from her. You're making things worse for all of us. I wiped at my eyes, anger mixing with the fear, hot and sharp. I typed back each word, slow, careful. They left me. They don't get to have me back. There was no reply, just silence, and I tossed the phone onto the bed, pressing my hands against my face, trying to breathe. Outside the window, I could hear Ben's voice in the backyard, laughing with Michael as they raked leaves into piles. The sound felt like it came from another world, one I didn't deserve to be part of, but one I wasn't ready to lose. I stood up, pacing the small room, the floor creaking under my bare feet. I knew Ethan was the voice on the phone, pretending to be some family lawyer, using Madeline to get to me. I knew what he wanted: money, control, whatever Celeste and Magnus promised him. But I wasn't going to let them pull me back. I wasn't going to let them decide my life anymore. I pulled on a sweatshirt and opened the door, stepping into the hallway. Susan was in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, her eyes staring at nothing. She looked up when she saw me, trying to force a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Morning, honey, she said, her voice tired. I nodded, walking to the table and sitting down across from her. The air felt heavy, the silence thick, pressing down on both of us. They called again last night, Susan said, her fingers drumming against the mug. That man Ethan, he said, he's representing the Parker family now. He said we're breaking the law by keeping you here. My stomach twisted, anger and fear battling inside me. He's not a lawyer, I said, my voice flat. He's Maddie's boyfriend. He's using her to get to me. Susan's eyes softened, but her jaw tightened. I know, sweetheart. But they're pushing hard. I could feel it, the walls closing in the way they always did when Celeste and Magnus wanted something. They would push until I gave in, until I broke. But I wasn't going to break this time. The front door opened and Ben stepped in, stomping snow off his boots, his cheeks red from the cold. He looked between us, reading the tension in the room immediately. What happened now? He asked, dropping his backpack by the door. Susan sighed, rubbing her forehead. Ethan called again. Ben's hands clenched at his sides. They can't just take her back. They can't. They're trying to scare us, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. Ben walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. They're not going to win. I pulled out my phone, staring at the last message from Maddie, her words still sharp in my head. Your family, Rachel. You belong home. Home. It wasn't home, it was a cage. I started typing, my thumbs moving fast, each word cutting through the fear. You gave them my address, didn't you? It took a few minutes before the typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. I had to, Rachel. They're our parents. I let out a sharp breath, my vision blurring for a moment. I blinked it away, my jaw tightening. They left me, I typed. They don't want me. They just want control. Her reply came fast. You don't understand how hard it's been for them. I almost laughed, but it came out as a low, broken sound. I could picture her sitting in her tiny apartment with Ethan, believing every lie Celeste told her, thinking she was doing the right thing. Ben leaned over, reading the messages, his eyes darkening. She's not on your side. I swallowed, typing one last message. Don't contact me again. I blocked her number, my finger hovering over the screen before I pressed down, a final small act of control. Susan was watching me, her eyes filled with something like pride but also sadness. I'm calling child services again today, she said. We're going to fight this. I nodded, pressing my lips together to keep them from trembling. I wasn't going to cry, not over them, not anymore. Ben squeezed my shoulder gently. You're not alone, Rachel. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the promise in his eyes. For the first time, I believed it fully. But deep down, I knew this wouldn't end until I ended it. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Susan met me outside the school office holding a small envelope. Her eyes were soft, but her lips pressed together like she was holding something back. She handed it to me carefully like it might break in her hands. "This came for you," she said. I looked down, seeing my name written in shaky, careful letters. Rachel Parker, in a handwriting I didn't recognize, but something about it made my chest tighten. "Who is it from?" I asked, my voice small. Susan placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I think you should read it, honey." I nodded, slipping the envelope into my backpack, walking silently next to her to the car. The ride home was quiet, the envelope burning in my mind, my fingers itching to tear it open. When we got back, I went straight to the small desk in the guest room, dropping my bag and sitting down. I pulled the envelope out, turning it over in my hands, tracing the letters with my thumb. Then I opened it. The paper inside was thin-lined, the ink smudged in places. The handwriting was messy but careful, like each letter was written slowly with trembling hands. "My dearest Rachel," it started. I felt the world pause, the air catching in my chest. "I don't know if you will ever get this. I've tried to send letters, gifts, cards since you were 12, but I don't know if you ever saw them. I don't know if you even know I'm still here." I blinked, tears blurring the words, but I kept reading. "Your mother didn't want me around. She told me it was better if I stayed away. Your father took what little I had left, said it was for your future, but I don't think that was true. They made me sign papers I didn't understand, and then I ended up here in a place that smells like bleach and sadness." My hand flew to my mouth, a small sob escaping. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, Rachel. I'm sorry I wasn't there to hold you when you were scared, to tell you that you were loved, that you were wanted. Because you were. You are." The tears fell hot and fast, dripping onto the paper, smudging the ink. "I love you, my sweet girl. I always have. I always will. Love, Grandma Margaret." I pressed the paper to my chest, curling over it, the sobs shaking my body. All this time I thought no one wanted me, that I was alone, that I was worthless. But it was a lie. They lied. Celeste lied. Magnus lied. And they took everything from her, from me, just so they could keep control, so they could keep me small, afraid, grateful for the scraps they threw me. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, clutching the letter so tightly the paper crinkled under my fingers. I stood up, walking to the window, looking out at the street, the snow falling in soft flakes, covering the world in quiet white. But inside me there was nothing quiet anymore. They took everything from me. They hurt the only person who truly loved me. They left me alone. I pressed the letter against my lips, closing my eyes, letting the last tear fall. And I promised her right there in that small, quiet room that I would make them pay. I placed the letter gently on the desk, smoothing the wrinkles where my hands had shaken. I didn't want to let it go, but I needed to breathe. I stood by the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass, watching the snow fall in soft, slow flakes under the streetlight. Each flake felt like a tiny promise that the world was bigger than Celeste and Magnus, bigger than the lies they told me. Downstairs, the soft clink of dishes reached me, Susan's voice mixing with Ben's low laugh. It was a warm sound, safe, but inside me, everything felt sharp, buzzing like I had swallowed electricity. I walked downstairs, the letter folded carefully in my pocket, every step steady. Susan turned, drying her hands on a towel, her eyes scanning my face. "You want some tea, honey?" she asked. I nodded, sitting at the table. My hands curled around the warm mug she placed in front of me, grounding me. I watched the steam rise, remembering how Grandma Margaret used to put extra honey in my tea, calling it sunshine in a cup. Susan sat across from me, her eyes soft but searching. "Do you want to talk about it?" I shook my head at first, but then the words pushed out. "She tried to send me letters. For years, they kept them from me." Susan's lips pressed into a hard line, her hand resting over mine. "They don't deserve to be your parents." I swallowed, the anger tightening in my chest. "They took her money, left her in a place that smells like bleach, and never told me." Ben leaned against the doorframe, watching, his face pale, eyes hard. "We're going to see her, right?" he asked, looking at his mom. Susan nodded. "I called the nursing home. They said she's been asking about you, Rachel. They said she talks about you all the time." A sob crawled up my throat, but I swallowed it down, shaking my head. "I thought no one wanted me." "You were wanted," Susan said, her voice fierce. You were loved. Don't let their lies take that from you. I pressed my palms to my eyes, letting out a shaky breath. She said she's sorry for not protecting me. She did her best, Susan whispered. She's still trying. I lowered my hands, meeting her eyes. I need to see her. You will, she promised. Ben walked over, pulling out the chair next to me, dropping into it. We'll go this weekend. I nodded, gripping the cup tighter, letting the warmth soak into my cold hands. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the letter under my pillow, the words running through my head like a quiet chant. You are loved. You are wanted. I turned on my side, staring at the moonlight spilling across the floor, remembering every time Celeste called me ungrateful, every time Magnus slammed the door in my face, every cold dinner where no one spoke to me. They made me believe I was nothing. But Grandma Margaret never stopped believing in me. And now I had a piece of her love, proof that their lies were just that, lies. Proof that I wasn't worthless. That I wasn't alone. In the darkness, I let my promise take shape. I would see her. I would tell her she wasn't alone either. And then I would make sure Celeste and Magnus could never hurt us again. Ben and I stood side by side, caps in hand, as the Stanford bells rang out. The crowd around us buzzed with laughter, cheers, and camera shutters, but for a moment all I heard was my heartbeat, steady and calm. I looked down at the diploma in my hands, the seal catching the afternoon sun, proof that I had made it. Ben reached over, his fingers brushing mine before he laced them together. We did it, he whispered, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Yeah, we did. We walked down the steps, our robes brushing against each other, the crowd parting around us as families hugged and posed for photos. I watched them, remembering the empty chairs at my high school graduation, how Celeste and Magnus never showed up, how I told everyone I didn't care. Now I didn't have to pretend. Susan and Michael stood waiting, their faces bright with pride. Susan's eyes glassy as she pulled me into a hug. You've made it so far, Rachel, she whispered against my hair. I hugged her back, closing my eyes for a moment, letting myself feel it, letting myself be held without fear. Michael clapped Ben on the back, pride in his eyes. Ready to take on the world, son? Ben grinned, glancing at me. We're ready. Later, as we packed up the last of our boxes in our tiny apartment, I pulled out the folder from the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside were papers, screenshots, copies of old emails, bank records, hospital reports. Evidence. 7 years of gathering every piece of proof, every lie they told, every debt Magnus forced Grandma Margaret to sign, every time Celeste told the world I was ungrateful. The screenshots of Ethan pretending to be a family lawyer, threatening Susan, and Michael demanding money to drop charges. Ben closed the last box and turned to me, his smile fading as he saw what I was holding. He walked over, sitting next to me on the floor, taking the folder from my hands, flipping through it carefully. You've been ready for this for a long time, he said. I nodded, the old fear trying to creep in, but I pushed it back. I needed to be sure. We have David now, Ben reminded me. And you have me. I looked at him, really looked, seeing the boy who found me on that cold night by the mall, who handed me a soda and told me I wasn't alone, who stood by me every day since. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. It's time. That afternoon we drove to David's office in downtown Seattle, the clouds hanging low over the city, the rain tapping softly against the windshield. Ben parked the car, glancing at me. You sure you're ready? He asked. I nodded, gripping the folder in my lap. I'm ready. Inside, David's office smelled like coffee and old paper, the hum of the city muffled by the thick windows. David looked up from his desk, his kind eyes serious as he gestured for us to sit. You've done the work, Rachel, he said, flipping through the folder. We have enough to move forward. I watched his fingers move across the documents, the photos of Grandma Margaret's signature shaky, and forced the statements from the nursing home about how the payment stopped, the screenshots of Celeste's live stream calling me ungrateful. The phone logs from Ethan's threats. They don't get to win, I said quietly. David looked up, nodding. No, they don't. Ben reached over, taking my hand, squeezing it once, grounding me. I met David's eyes, my voice clear. File the case. David's lips curved into a small smile. It would be my honor. David stood, shaking Ben's hand, then mine, his grip firm, steady. I'll draft everything tonight, he said, gathering the papers into a neat stack. Tomorrow we file. I nodded, pressing my palm against the folder, feeling its weight, the years of fear and anger it carried. As we stepped out into the Seattle drizzle, Ben opened the umbrella, holding it over us, while we walked toward the car. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement, painting the streets with streaks of red and gold. We didn't speak for a while, the soft patter of rain on the windshield filling the silence. Ben kept glancing at me, his hand resting near mine on the console, close enough that I could feel his warmth. "You okay?" he asked finally. I turned to him, letting out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "Yeah. Just. It's finally happening." Ben's lips twitched into a small smile. "It's been a long time coming." I nodded, looking out the window, watching the lights blur past. They don't get to hide anymore. Back at our small apartment, I placed the folder carefully on the kitchen table, the lamp above casting a soft glow on the documents. Ben locked the door, setting his keys down, then came to stand beside me. "You did this," he said quietly. "You survived them. Now you're going to beat them." I felt my throat tighten, but I pushed the tears back, swallowing them down. "We did this," I corrected, looking up at him. His hand found mine, his thumb brushing over my knuckles, grounding me the way he always did. "We did." We spent the evening going over the final details, Ben helping me scan a few last documents, saving them to our encrypted drive, labeling each folder with dates and notes. The room felt heavy with purpose, but under it there was a quiet sense of hope, a calm I hadn't felt in years. Around midnight, I closed the laptop, leaning back in my chair, exhaustion washing over me. Ben stood stretching, then pulled me into a hug, his chin resting on the top of my head. "You're incredible, you know that," he murmured. I let out a small laugh muffled against his chest. "I'm just tired." "Yeah," he said, pulling back to look at me, "but you're also brave." I held his gaze, letting his words sink in, letting myself believe them, even if just for a moment. Just as I was about to speak, my phone buzzed on the table, the vibration sharp in the quiet room. I glanced at Ben, then reached for it, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hello." A woman's voice came through, shaking, breathless. "Is this Rachel Parker?" "Yes," I said slowly, my pulse picking up. I'm so sorry to call you like this, but your grandmother, Margaret. She's been put out of the facility. She's sitting outside alone. She doesn't know where to go." My vision swam, my fingers tightening around the phone. "What? Why?" "They stopped paying her fees. They said her family refused to help. She keeps asking for you." The room felt too small, the walls pressing in. I looked at Ben, his eyes wide, his jaw clenching as he listened. "Where is she?" I managed to ask, my voice cracking. The woman gave me the address, her voice gentle, apologetic. I ended the call, my hand trembling as I lowered the phone, looking at Ben. "She's outside," I whispered. "They left her. Again." Ben's hand found mine, gripping it tight. "We'll get her, Rachel." I nodded, swallowing the sob rising in my chest. This wasn't over. They weren't done taking from us. But neither was I. Ben drove the streets of Seattle, wet and glinting under the streetlights, as we pulled into the small park. I saw her before we stopped, sitting on a bench near the edge of the path, a thin sweater pulled tight around her shoulders. Her hair was thinner, whiter than I remembered, her small frame shaking in the cold. I stepped out before the car had fully stopped, my boots splashing in a puddle as I ran toward her. "Grandma," I called, my voice breaking. Her head jerked up, her red-rimmed eyes scanning until they landed on me. They softened, filling with tears, and her lips trembled. "Rachel," she whispered. I dropped to my knees in front of her, taking her cold, frail hands into mine. "I'm here," I said, my voice steady even as tears rolled down my cheeks. "I've got you now." She reached up, brushing a tear from my cheek with trembling fingers. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. I helped her to her feet, wrapping my arm around her as Ben appeared with a blanket, draping it around her shoulders. She leaned into me, her small frame light, but her presence grounding me in a way nothing else could. We drove back in silence, her hand in mine the whole way, her thumb brushing back and forth like she was reassuring herself that I was real. At the apartment, Susan had already prepared a warm meal, the smell of soup filling the space. Grandma Margaret sat at the small table, her eyes scanning the photos on the wall, the plants on the windowsill, the small touches that made this place feel like home. "Thank you," she whispered to Susan, her eyes shining. "Your family," Susan said softly, her hand resting on Grandma's shoulder. That night, as she settled into the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed holding her hand. She looked at me, her eyes tired but warm. "You've grown into a strong woman," she said. "I had to," I whispered. She nodded slowly. "And now it's time they learn what that means." The next morning we stood outside the courthouse, the gray clouds heavy above, a cold wind brushing against my face. Ben stood beside me, his hand resting on the small of my back, grounding me. David met us at the steps, his briefcase in hand, his eyes calm and focused. "Are you ready?" he asked. I looked at him, then at Ben, then back at the courthouse doors. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Inside, Celeste and Magnus sat at the defendant's table. Celeste's eyes red, makeup smudged, Magnus's jaw clenched tight, refusing to look at me. Madeline sat in the back, her hands twisting in her lap. Ethan beside her, a smug look on his face, tapping his foot as if he was bored. David stood, presenting the evidence with steady, clear words. The papers showing how they abandoned me at 15. The bank statements proving Magnus drained Grandma's account, forging her signature. The video clips of Celeste's live stream calling me ungrateful, rallying strangers to shame me. The recordings of Ethan's threats, demanding money, pretending to be a lawyer. As the evidence piled up, the smugness on Ethan's face faltered, Madeline's eyes widening, tears spilling as she turned to him, whispering, "Is it true?" Ethan tried to stand, but officers stepped forward, placing him in handcuffs. The clink of metal echoed in the silent room, Madeline letting out a soft sob as Ethan was led away. Celeste's eyes found mine, wide and desperate, her lips trembling. "Rachel, we just wanted you home," she whispered. I stood, stepping forward, meeting her gaze, my voice calm. "This is the lesson you needed to learn." She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Magnus stared at the table, his shoulders slumped for the first time in my life, and I felt nothing but clarity. The judge's gavel struck the wood, the sound sharp in the quiet courtroom. David gathered the last of the papers, sliding them into his briefcase, nodding once at me, calm and certain. I stood, my legs steady, my hands no longer shaking. Across the room, Madeline pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaking her makeup as she watched Ethan being led away in handcuffs, his face pale, eyes darting around for a way out. He tried to pull away, shouting, "This is a mistake, you can't do this." The officers tightened their grip, leading him out as the heavy door closed behind them with a final echoing thud. Madeline turned to me, her eyes red, pleading. "Rachel. I didn't know. I didn't know he." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "You chose not to know." She flinched, taking a step back, her shoulders crumpling under the weight of the truth she could no longer ignore. Celeste's lawyer leaned over, whispering to her, but she didn't move, her eyes locked on me, wide and empty. "We just wanted you to come home," she whispered again, softer this time, like she was trying to convince herself. I stepped forward, close enough to see the fine lines around her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she twisted the hem of her sleeve. "Home isn't a place you get to demand," I said, my voice calm. "Home is where you're safe. You made sure I never had that." Magnus didn't look up, his hands clenched on the table, his shoulders hunched like he was trying to disappear. For once, there was no rage, no barked orders, just silence, heavy and small. The judge's voice broke through, clear and final, sentencing Magnus and Celeste to restitution, probation, and mandatory counseling for elder abuse, adding community service for their role in the financial exploitation of Grandma Margaret. Their lawyer tried to argue, but the judge cut him off, reminding the court of the evidence, the signatures Magnus forced, the payments stopped, the live streams Celeste posted. I stood listening, each word from the judge like a stone placed back where something had been hollow in my chest for so long. Each sentence was a piece of my childhood reclaimed. As the bailiff called for the courtroom to clear, I turned, finding Grandma Margaret seated quietly in the back, Susan beside her holding her hand. Grandma's eyes glistened, but she smiled, small and proud. I walked to her, kneeling down, taking her hand in mine. "It's over, Grandma," I whispered. Her hand, frail and warm, closed around mine, her thumb brushing over my skin. "You did it, my girl," she whispered back. "You brought the truth to light." I stood, helping her to her feet, Susan steadying her other side. Ben was waiting at the doors, his eyes on me, a quiet pride in his gaze. We stepped out of the courthouse, the cold Seattle air brushing against my face, the wind carrying the scent of rain and salt from the bay. I closed my eyes, breathing it in, letting the noise of the city wrap around me. For the first time, there was no weight pressing on my shoulders, no fear clawing at my throat. I stepped forward, the wind lifting strands of my hair, the city alive around me. And for the first time I was truly free. I woke up to the soft light of dawn spilling across the ceiling. For a moment I lay still, listening, waiting for the sound of footsteps in the hall, the creak of the floor, the sharp knock on the door that used to send fear through me. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the city waking up, the distant sound of seagulls over the bay, the soft rustle of Ben breathing next to me. I turned my head, watching him sleep, his hair messy, his face relaxed in a way that made something warm bloom in my chest. Carefully, I slipped out of bed, pulling on a sweater, padding barefoot to the kitchen. Grandma Margaret was already awake, sitting at the small table by the window, a cup of tea in her hands, steam curling into the morning air. "Morning, Grandma," I said softly. She looked up, her eyes crinkling, her smile warm. "Morning, my girl." I poured myself a cup, sitting across from her, letting the quiet wrap around us. The light caught her silver hair, and for a moment I just let myself watch her, memorizing every line, every freckle, every piece of her that I almost lost. "You look peaceful," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, taking a sip of the tea, letting it warm me from the inside out. "I think I finally am." She reached across the table, her hand covering mine, her skin warm and thin but strong. "You made it, Rachel." I swallowed, blinking back the tears that burned at the edges of my eyes. "We made it." Ben appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, smiling when he saw us. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to the top of my head before stealing a sip of my tea. "Hey," I protested, a small laugh breaking free. He grinned, settling into the chair next to me. "You two are up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said, shrugging. "I could," Grandma said, a twinkle in her eye. "First time in years." We all laughed, the sound soft, filling the kitchen in a way that made it feel like home. Later that morning, I stood on the balcony, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, looking out over the Seattle skyline. The sun was rising, painting the buildings in soft gold, the bay sparkling in the light. I thought about everything it took to get here. About the mall where they left me. About the years of fear, of loneliness, of wondering if I was worth loving. About finding Ben, finding Susan, and Michael, finding my way back to Grandma. About standing in that courtroom, looking Celeste in the eye, and refusing to be afraid. About the promise I made to that scared, lonely girl sitting on the curb with a dead phone and empty pockets. I kept that promise. I saved her. And now, standing here, the city alive around me, the air cool and clean, I let myself breathe. Really breathe. Because I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't the child they left behind. I wasn't the secret they tried to bury. I was free. And I was home. Ben stepped out onto the balcony, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, the steam curling in the morning chill. He handed me one, his hand brushing mine, warm and steady. I took a sip, letting the heat settle into me as I leaned against him, feeling his arm slip around my waist, thinking he asked quietly. I nodded, watching the sun rise over the Seattle skyline, the light catching on the glass buildings, painting them gold. "About how far we've come." He pressed a kiss to the side of my head. "We did it." I turned to look at him, seeing the boy who found me, the man who stood beside me in court, the partner who built a life with me. "Yeah," I whispered. "We really did." Inside, Grandma Margaret sat at the kitchen table, a soft blanket around her shoulders, her hair tied back in a loose bun. She was humming softly as she flipped through an old photo album, her fingers pausing on a picture of me at 10 years old, my smile wide and gap-toothed. I walked over, sitting beside her, letting my head rest on her shoulder. She turned, pressing a kiss to my hair. "You were always brave," she whispered. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of her words sink in. "I learned it from you." She chuckled softly, the sound filling the room like sunlight. "And look where you are now." I looked around, taking in the small apartment, the plants on the windowsill, the photos of our team at the company we built, the shelves lined with books, the warmth that filled every corner. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours. It was safe. It was home. Ben sat across from us, scrolling through the company's reports on his laptop, looking up to smile at me every few minutes. Our startup had grown faster than we expected, and clients trusted us, respected us. We built it on honesty, on hard work, on the promise that we would never become like them. Magnus and Celeste lost everything in court. Their reputation, their money, their lies exposed. They tried to smear my name again, but no one listened this time. No one believed them. Ethan was still in prison serving time for fraud and attempted extortion, his smirk wiped from his face when the verdict was read. Madeline had shown up to one of the hearings, standing at the back, tears on her cheeks as she signed the papers to end it with him. She moved to a small town, started over, sent me a letter once, apologizing for not seeing the truth sooner. I forgave her, but I didn't let her back in. Some things could heal, but some things needed distance to stay whole. That night, I stood on the balcony again, the lights of Seattle glittering below, the cold air sharp and clean. Ben stepped behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of rain and city lights. "Yeah," I whispered, "I am." Because I wasn't the girl they left behind at that mall anymore. I wasn't the scared teenager hiding in corners, waiting for the yelling to stop. I wasn't the secret they tried to bury. I was free. And I was finally home. What would you have done if you were me? Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.